up on our final virtual session of the day. So stay tuned across our Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube to join us for the remaining on-site sessions that we'll be having today and tomorrow. And for those of you on Zoom, you are welcome to throw in any questions you might have into the chat, and we'll do our best to weave them into their conversation. Hi, Jill. How's it going?
Hi there. Doing great. Good to see you.
You too. I will go ahead and pass it on to you to start our session for us as everyone else hops on.
That sounds great. Thank you. Welcome, everybody, for the final session of the day. We have such an important topic to discuss, and I'm really excited to explore with this phenomenal panel. This session is called The Role of Sports in Social Justice Movements. And my name is Jill Wesley. I'm in partnerships with the Female Quotient. And if we think about it, Carlos and Tommie Smith raised their fists in the 1968 Olympics, and nearly half a century later, Colin Kaepernick took a knee, and WNBA players used their platform for change. These are examples of how sports can truly propel social justice movements forward. And in this conversation, we're going to discuss the reawakening of athletes' social conscience and how the sports industry can use its position of power to support equity. So we are going to welcome this phenomenal group of leaders today and really dive in and have a great conversation. I want to start with who I see on the on my Brady Bunch screen here, all these wonderful faces. I'm going to start actually with Blayre Holmes Davis. We're going to be welcoming her in a second. She's Director of Community Relations for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Madieu Williams, lawyer, philanthropist, entrepreneur, and he was named Walter Peyton NFL Man of the Year. We have Bahati VanPelt, Chief of Athlete Services for the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee. Dr. Sybil Smith, Executive Director of the Sloane Stephens Foundation, and Tori Franklin, USA Track and Field and Players Coalition Advocate. Welcome to you all. And I'd love to start with you, Blayre. Can you tell us a little bit about why this topic is important to you and how it ties into the work you do?
Yes, so first, good afternoon, everyone. Jill, thank you so much for the invitation. I'm really excited to be here and just share this space with you. I think this topic ties into so many different ways. I think, as Jill, as you've opened up, sports and social justice work have always been hand in hand, and they will continue to be. So I think it's so important that we have these conversations about the work that has been done, the work that is going on right now, and the work that is still yet to begin. And for me, I think my background is not in football. My background is in gender equity, a lot around women's rights work. And so when I came to the Steelers, one of my first things was I told them, I was like, this work is so important, but we also need to make sure that we're focusing on social justice work. And that's not only around our players and what they're doing, but then looking at Pittsburgh as a whole and thinking about what are issues and just strategic initiatives that we really need to take on as a team and as a city. And so I think for us as an organization, there's no reason to go back in history, but the Pittsburgh Steelers have always really taken a deep dive in around equity and inclusion and making sure that players have the ability to make their voices heard. But then in addition to that, that we as a team are at the forefront of that. And I would just say, it's been exciting to see so many players just get involved in their communities and talk about so many different issues and just to see the work that is still yet to begin.
Absolutely. Oh, thank you for being with us. And speaking of, my work revolves around helping people use their voice, athletes in particular, speaking about things that matter to them most. And Madieu, you have had a history of doing that in multiple sectors on and off the field. I'd love for you to introduce yourself, why this topic is really important to you right now.
Well, Jill, thank you for having me. It's an honor and privilege to be among the various panelists that's here today. For me personally, I think gender equity and inclusion has been something that's I've kind of focused on post-career. It actually started during my tenure in the NFL with the construction of a school in my birth home in Sierra Leone and providing access for education for young girls starting in pre-K through 8th grade. And our school in particular is predominantly women with 65%. And partly is because of access of education in third world country. With that said, as a former NFL player, it's important for us to continue to use our platform. Sports has long been intertwined with social justice movement. I think what has transpired over the last few years has heightened the awareness, and more players are actually feeling more empowered to actually utilize their voice and to able to speak on issues that are important to them. So I'm looking forward to this conversation. Thank you for having me.
We're thrilled. Thank you. And transitioning, we're going to football and to the Olympics. Bahati, you have really interesting experience coming from all the years in football at the Trust and with the Jaguars, and then transitioning into athlete services for the Olympic and Paralympic Committee. Tell us a little bit why this topic is meaningful to you and how it ties into your work.
Thank you, Jill, and good to see everybody. And I echo all of the comments of being happy and honored to be able to join this panel. As you mentioned, coming from the NFL, obviously players utilizing their voices and leveraging their platforms in many different areas, whether it's in the community or about areas that they're passionate about, is something that has been woven in to that framework for many, many years. And they're having the opportunity now to be at the USOPC and really be so impressed with what our athletes are doing, with the work that we're doing in the race and social justice space, having an opportunity to hear from them, to understand, to learn, to be led by them in these conversations and the directions that we are moving in, and then really being good partners to our athletes and working with them in our national governing bodies to see how can we have long-term sustainable impact in this space beyond just where we are now, in 2021, but what this movement and what this community will look like for years to come. So that's why I'm passionate about it. I come from a family that is passionate about these issues and how we can make progress. And like I say, being led by our athletes has been a joy and a privilege for me over the last year and a half since I came to the USOPC.
Wonderful. Thank you. You actually said something about your family being passionate about it. And I have a sense that maybe many of you on the panel also have family members that are passionate about these issues too. So from an athlete perspective, from track and field, Tori, I'd love to hear a little bit about you and what this topic means to you.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so I do track and field, and even when I was in high school, I recognized the influence that I had as an athlete, not only just to the students who didn't do sports, but even to the younger athletes on my team. And so going to Michigan State University, I recognized that as an athlete, we have the power to influence those around us, just by the younger generation that look up to us and then amongst our peers. So continuing to do that on my platform now is really important to me. And yes, I think that we can do a lot more than we have been doing in the more recent years.
Absolutely. Got it. I agree. There's so much more we can do. And I love this next generation of athletes who feel empowered to use their platform and voice. And last but not least, Sybil Smith, so happy to have you. Talk to us a little bit about why this topic is so meaningful to you.
Well, thank you for having me. As everyone said, it's really an absolute pleasure to be here with everyone and have the opportunity to speak and share information. I work with the Sloane Stephens Foundation. Sloane is my daughter, and she's a professional tennis player. So we've been in tennis she's 28, so she turned pro when she was 16 years old, started her foundation when she was about 20. And we work within communities across the country. Our strongest program is in Compton, where we serve about 2,000 kids every year. We introduce them to tennis. And I think what's important for us and what we do with the organization is we introduce kids to sport, and we use sport as sort of that tool to help them learn their voices, learn that they have a voice, learn how to utilize their voice, and just empower children to become leaders within their communities, and then children children teaching the generation that they've come from that there is something beyond that, and that they can expand that reach and that voice. And a big part of what we do is provide services that level the playing field for these kids so that they know that they have a chance. And once kids become empowered and learn how to use their voices, which is what we try to do every single day, we teach them how to use those voices. That's where the power of sport becomes really important, because the kids we introduce to sport, the 2,000, 3,000 kids across the country, around the world, they're not going to be professional tennis players per se, but they're going to be vocal patrons of life, and they're going to give back to their communities. And that's what that's how we use sport within our organization. So I think it's just powerful to continue that, and then to, of course, watch Sloane utilize her voice, and for her to be a mentor to all the kids she encounters across the country on almost weekly basis.
Yeah, phenomenal child. You must be such a proud mom at thinking about what she's accomplished. And I think about what I was doing at 16. It was, I wasn't leading a nonprofit. It's fabulous. So I just saw a quick comment in the chat from Natalia, who said, Sybil, you're the best, which is amazing. And we are going to use this chat function. We love to have interactive sessions. So we have people watching, tuning in from all over the country, all over the world, on different platforms. So we'd love to hear where you're tuning in from. So feel free to drop where your location is in the chat. Well, I pivot over to Madieu. Tell us why you think sports is such an effective vehicle or platform for social change.
Well, I think sports is such an instrumental platform for social change because the wide array of audience that sports attract. You take a look at on a given Sunday, for example, with football, the amount of people that tune in. You have a great opportunity to share your message across so many people who otherwise you won't have their listening ear. You have a ready listening ear, so to speak. And I think that, especially specifically in this country, sports is such a catalyst for everything that we do. And why not utilize that platform to make change?
Right. I mean, it touches every possible issue in society. Your day-to-day, Blayre, really touches on the sports and then what's happening within community and all the other stakeholders. How do you made a transition from not being in sports to being in sports. So how do you see sports fitting in? Why is it such an effective platform?
Yeah, so I mean, I would definitely agree. I think just the audience that it has just on a Sunday, right? Just being able to bring together millions of people. But then I think of our athletes. I think some, they're glorified people, but the reality is at the end of the day, they're people just like you and I, right? And I think their ability to be able to tell stories about how they grew up or things that they experienced, as Black men in this country, and being able to really humanize what is going on to people. Because I think people, think of them as I mentioned, superheroes, right? You think of them as Black Panthers, right? But they're football players and they're human beings, right? And so them being able to normalize, to talk about their lived experience. And I think that's one of the most powerful things that athletes can do, is to just really share their stories, tell their stories about how they grew up, and also how they're looking to give back to the community. And I think that's one of the most exciting things about my job, is being able to work with our players to say, who are you, right? I think it's great, the great work that you're able to do on the field, that's amazing. But I want to get to know who you are as a person, what are your values, and how we can do good work together.
Absolutely. Who are they as people is everything, because then you tap into what matters most, what their connections are, and how they can continue to give back and empower others. Bahati, talk to me about, I'm curious, because you're working with so many sports, and you have those roots in football. Are there some social justice movements in sports that have inspired you, and how does that impact what you're doing today?
Yeah, so my biggest inspiration now is, after the murder of George Floyd and everything that happened last summer, the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee, we created the Team USA Council on Racial and Social Justice. and it's an athlete-led group. We have about 65 athletes who are leading, whether it's the core group, which is sort of like the umbrella that moves throughout the different pillars. And then we have 4 pillars that we established, and we have an athlete-led steering committee within those 4 pillars. So there's athlete representation, there is representation from the national governing bodies, representation from the USOPC, and then there's representation from an alumni standpoint for former Olympians and Paralympics. And the 4 pillars we outlined were protests and demonstrations, athlete voice and advocacy, institutional awareness and cultural change, and then racism and acts of discrimination. And so, like I say, not only is it the core group that oversees and kind of moves throughout and helps to keep those different pillars on track, but those steering committees within each of those pillars really are the ones that are having the conversations. They are digging through and understanding the topics. They are drafting recommendations and suggestions on how we can see long-term impactful change. And then we also have a community ambassadors group that is made up of athletes and NGB staff that really help to educate, get the word out, have the tough conversations about these different topics, and really act as a voice and a platform for not only the recommendations and the suggestions we bounce off of, but really to go forth and then talk to the different peers about how these recommendations will take effect and the change that we'll have. So I always say it was not part of the original job description when I came here, but
Right.
You know, with challenges, there's opportunities, and you know, we really hope that we've seized this opportunity in this time in order to see some change that will be long lasting.
That's right. Because, you know, most of you, I'm sure, have heard the expression, we don't want this just to be a moment. It's a movement. We want to have systemic change. We want to have lasting change. So for you to envision this this initiative with athletes and have those 4 pillars is really remarkable. I mean, it's the first time it's ever been done. And, you know, we want to empower the athletes, which brings me to you, Dr. Sybil. I'm thinking about, you know, having this fantastic program in Compton and the influence that Serena and Venus Williams had on younger generations, and then having your own daughter kind of continue this work. What are your thoughts on how are there specific social justice movements in history that influenced you in your role and how you roll out these programs within the community?
Absolutely. My history, I was a swimmer growing up. So I swam in college, and that was back in the 80s. There were very few Black swimmers around. You know, I'd go to pools and I was typically the only person there. So going to college and having that experience was really challenging for me. So I knew what it was like to be alone. I knew that there were a lot of issues out there where, you know, African Americans were encouraged not to speak. And so for me personally, John Carlos has always been a big hero of mine. And although that was before my time, that's something I grew up with as a 7th of 8 kids. My family, my older siblings were all about the movement. And I grew up really having a solid base and understanding how sport could make change, and that how important it was to speak your mind and to be, just be who you are, be a good human, you know, just be a great person and speak for what you believe in. And I think that was the movement that was really important and helped me in my process raising an athlete. I raised a child, but as an athlete, she's always fought for what she believed in, because that's how she was raised. And looking and working with other students, other children, you know, we do the same. We believe that sport is the great unifier, no matter what. And it doesn't matter the sport. It doesn't matter the level of the sport. The sport brings people together. And no matter what, throughout the last year with George Floyd and all the things, the uprising in our country and in our world, we've tried to use our platforms, the foundation platform, Sloane's platform, to really just keep people positive because that's Sloane's way, that's our way. We use lots of positive affirmations. Our social media staff are on the call. They, you know, we want to keep people positive and affirmed and encouraged to continue to speak out and use their voices wisely. Every voice is different for Sloane in an individual sport. Just, you know, thinking about how groups of athletes versus individual athletes, how that works. There's always that balance when athletes speak out, and depending on where you are in your sport, Colin Kaepernick, you know, Colin's lost his career because he chose to lead this process. And we're all grateful for that, because it's a movement and it's changed things. So we're inspired by a lot. We encourage everyone to be positive, and that's sort of our way. If you take a look at how we do things, is just to be very positive and to bring people together on a daily basis through our affirmations and encouragement and inspiration. And that's what we do with the kids we work with.
And they need it. And we think about, you know, the Gen Y and the Gen Zs. I mean, they're bombarded with so much messaging, and that reminder to pouring into them and keeping them nourished and positive is also a really important thing when they're bombarded with so many different messages. Tori, how do you draw inspiration? Are there people over the years or movements that have been instrumental in the work you do?
Mm-hmm. I think I draw a lot of my inspiration from other athletes. I myself grew up in my younger years in a predominantly white area, and I experienced moments of discrimination and racism, and I didn't know how to manage that. I kind of just poured all of my energy into sport, and after just seeing various athletes just being themselves out loud and speaking out about their trials of being, you know, Black American athletes, it allowed me to find that same type of strength, if you will, to be able to do the same. And so now that's why I feel like it's really important for me specifically. I know everybody does their thing in a different way. Not everybody feels comfortable speaking out or being in the streets protesting or whatever. And so when I put myself out there, I kind of do it in different ways. For example, I'm a writer, so I write blogs and stories. I also am in the streets protesting, and then I also like to speak on different panels like this so that I can reach people in where they need to be met.
Right. Oh, and it's a great reminder that people can participate in various ways. It can be writing, it can be music, it can be speaking out, it can be
donating,
right? Mm-hmm. Starting organizations. And I think about you, and really quick to any of you who are joining us, I'm always curious about which movements have inspired you, whether it's LGBTQ rights, it's, you know, equity for Black Americans. Is it something related to gender? Anything that, you know, really speaks to you that stands out? I'm always curious. So feel free to drop that into the chat. Madieu, I'm curious, from playing at the level you did with the visibility and having this international background, having come to the States from Sierra Leone, were you 9? Was that?
Yes, that's correct.
So how would you answer to some people who say, listen, you need to stick to sports? Like, this is, you know, you're a great athlete, stay in your lane.
Well, I think one of the things that I've always say is, at the end of the day, when I take off the helmet and the shoulder pads, I still have to go home to the community in which I'm from. And my family, although I've been blessed and I'm in a position where, I live in the same neighborhood that I grew up from, that I was raised in, I still have relatives that are still there. So their problem become my problem, regardless of where I am in the socioeconomic standpoint. And so to answer your question, Jill, I cannot let it go by and just think that I can be okay. And for me, I was raised a little different in the sense that I have the international background where my parents, I had a huge influence. My parents had a huge influence on me and still does. I was encouraged to look beyond just myself, to be selfless. That was a word that was utilized a lot growing up, being selfless. And being selfless doesn't mean that you give all of yourself to people. It just means you need to care about just yourself. there are things that happen around you that impacts your day to day, whether you like it or not. And growing up in that environment has taught me that playing football is a privilege more so than anything, but it was not who I was destined to be as part of what I do. And I've always kept that in mind. And that was always the birdie in my ear when I was playing, specifically for my mom, who always say, hey, you're called to do bigger things than just play football.
Wow, that's deep. That's deep. And having that support really matters too. Bahati, what are your thoughts on people that say, stay in your lane, athletes need to stick to the game?
Yeah, I guess my response to that was saying, and having the opportunity and to talk to different athletes from many different sports about this is kind of the theory of strive to not let athletics be the highlight of your obituary. It's a platform. It's a tool that you can leverage. But as Madieu said, the long-term legacy that athletes can have go far beyond how many championships they won, statistics, Hall of Fame inductions, medals in our community, et cetera, because those are tremendous accomplishments, and that will be a part of what people remember. But there will be things that will be impactful to generations that athlete will never have any personal contact with, that will empower them, will inspire them, will create better communities, will create economic and educational opportunities that otherwise would not have been present without that particular athlete leveraging, bringing awareness, speaking out on the things that they are passionate about.
Definitely. And I know your philosophy has always been you're more than an athlete. And a lot of times when I'm working with athletes, I'm talking about like, what's the other highlight reel we want to create beyond your stats on the field, on the court, et cetera. So yeah, I really appreciate that. It's a great reminder to athletes about the opportunity and what lies beyond the sport. When I think about, I'm going to go to you, Blayre. When I think about some of the recent stats, there's been some surveys that have been conducted, and ESPN did one, and 7 out of 10 answered that they're okay with athletes speaking out, and especially younger fans have somewhat of an expectation that these athletes who are leaders would be speaking on things that are meaningful. How do you see the responsibility or the opportunity for a team to speak out on issues or get involved with initiatives that make a difference?
Yeah, so I mean, I think, kind of really starting at a basic level, I think, it's the responsibility of teams, our social responsibility to be a part of this work. I think the reality is that we all know football, basketball would not be the sport it is without Black people, right? So let's just let's start there. And then in addition to that, for your players to make sure that they have a space and also that they're able to voice their opinions. And then in addition to that, work with them to actually do the work. So I think it's so important for teams to take a stance and to work with their athletes on social justice work and continue to make sure that our next generation, that we're passing that baton, right? That they are able to see examples of athletes today and from previous generations doing this work, but then they clearly know the next step when it's time for them to carry the baton in this world. And it doesn't just need to be in sports. It could be whatever profession that they would like it to be. And then I think, there was a lot, like all of us have mentioned, there were so many things that happened in 2020. All of us were at home because of COVID, but we saw the murder of George Floyd on TV. There was nowhere for you to go. You were at home. It was directly in front of your face. And then we saw Breonna Taylor, story after story, right? And so I think there's power in numbers. And I think what you saw was not only athletes everywhere, but just different countries really pushing this movement and also really talking about it and holding organizations and people accountable to the work that they need to do. And I think when it comes to the next generation, I think we have a generation who is all technology, media, like TikTok, all of these things, right? And so speaking up to them, it's nothing new, right? They're just like, why wouldn't you speak up about these issues that are in your community? Why wouldn't we speak up about not having access to laptops and Wi-Fi, right? And so I think that there's so many things, not even just in terms of the work that's done with athletes and social justice, but just our youth in general, talking about what resources are, they need in their community. And I think, you know, this generation is way more, you know, just progressive and stronger than I feel like my generation was, right? And so I'm just really excited to see, you know, 30, 40 years from now, what it's going to look like, right? Because I feel like it's just, you know, it's already on fire now. And I think there's so much more to come through it. But I think the last thing I would say is that there was a quote by an athlete, I can't remember his name, but he said, you know, I grew up in a locker room, right? I grew up where, you know, the person next to me was my teammate, right? And we were family, right? And he said, I want the world to look that way, right? And so if you think of the concept of athletics and you think of, you know, the sense of a locker room, and if that's what you want out in the world, where it doesn't matter what so-and-so looks like or what neighborhood he grew up in, his race doesn't matter, that's the world that we want to get to, right? And so I would tell people, it's just like at the sports and just being an athletes and what they're able to do is such just a big way to just make so much change, to look at a concept of a locker room and say, if we want the person next to us to just be like anyone else, and it doesn't matter where they grew up or where they came from, then we really need to start projecting that out into the world.
Right. And changing the structures and
Absolutely.
systemic issues that prevent that person from just being seen, right? As a teammate. Yeah, I'm with you on that for sure. I appreciate it. I'm thinking about Dr. Sybil, the young people that you're working with. Do you see a difference in terms of girls using their voices? I mean, I'm from a generation where of course I was aware of social justice issues and I cared, but I also was kind of fed a bit of a myth, is like, as long as you work hard, or no, work twice as hard to get half as hard, like it'll be fine. And the reality is it doesn't work that way. So how do you see young people, especially particularly girls?
Well, you know, with what we do, you know, as I expressed before, we do a lot of nurturing, and we have a lot of discussion, mentoring, leadership programming that helps girls and boys, but girls in particular, to find their voices and to be comfortable with their voices and to find what's meaningful and powerful to them, so that they're, you know, they may not be able to express that, you know, between age 10 to 14, but 14 to 18, that expression starts to come through. You know, we have seniors in high school now who've been in our programming since they were 12 or 13, and wow, they're vocal, they're positive, they're inspired, they're active, very active in their communities. And that's our goal. That's, you know, one of the premises of our organization is we're inspiring these kids to change the generation. So to participate in that, to experience that, to watch what we do through sport have that impact, that's everything for us. And you know, Sloane is a woman, so for of course, having the impact on girls is hugely important for us, and it's a big part of what we do. We have vistas and people who actually participate with us through our AmeriCorps, and we use a lot of women to just inspire and teach girls to have that voice. And it you know, without sport, you know, we'd be able to do some of these things, but sports does so much more. It builds confidence, character, the participation with other, you know, even though tennis is an individual sport, we have lots of team, you know, activities and lots of ways to really speak up and to shine. And we also use our, you know, I mentioned earlier as well, our social channels are really important, sort of the method that we get our message out on a daily basis, and the foundation and Sloane's personal social media as well. No matter what's happening in the country, we're active. we're producing responses from our kids. We want our kids to understand and to know that their voice is important. Just like voting, it's your responsibility to vote. It's your responsibility to speak out and to have an opinion and to voice your opinion. It's okay. You know?
Oh, wow. That's wonderful. Thank you, Tori. And feel free Sybil, if in the chat, if you want to drop any of the social handles for people, that's also helpful. Sure. Tori, I'm thinking about you as an individual athlete and a woman. How has it been for you? Have you felt a lot of pressure to be a role model or to speak out? I mean, how do you kind of dance with some of that responsibility that you've taken on?
Yes, absolutely. I was actually just talking about this not too long ago, maybe even yesterday. It's a really interesting balance because a lot of what I do and say, I do public speaking, I go to high schools, different organizations. I do that because I want to. I do that because I love it and because I feel like I have something positive to share with people. But when you put yourself in that position, then it does kind of become an expectation, and then that kind of adds pressure in a sense. But I don't really see it as a burden by any means. I think, like Sybil said, I believe that it is our responsibility if you have the means to give back and to help encourage. So it's really a blessing that I'm able to do this, to be in this position, to have the platform that I have the support and the education that I do, to be able to help, teach and inspire the next generation and even my peers that may not be in the same situation.
Wow, I love hearing that. It's not a burden, it's a responsibility, opportunity, and you're walking the talk, which is so great and so inspirational for young people and your peers, for sure. In our remaining moments, I want to ask you, Madieu, from your perspective, where do you think the future of kind of sport and social justice movements may be going? Can you see into the future a little bit, or what do you think that will continue?
I can use my crystal ball and kind of project a little bit.
I thought you had one.
No, you know what I think, Jill? I think in the future, there's not going to be a blurred line. There's not going to be a situation where they're going to tell you to shut up and dribble the ball, so to speak. I think it's going to be a seamless transition where we expect more athletes to speak about social justice issue or just social issues in general, or just causes that are closest to their heart. I think that it's become more fashionable based on the generation that we currently are part of. And I think that is only going to enhance even more as they move towards the future.
Definitely. And Bahati, what are your thoughts? It's a global piece of the puzzle that the U.S. is part of. So you think athletes will continue to speak out? What do you think of the future of sport?
I think we will go in whatever direction athletes lead us. We have been, but we are definitely now squarely in an environment now where athletes have grown up being able to access the internet and get answers to questions that maybe athletes in the past did not have the resources to get that information. So as one of my former players that was in Jacksonville, Fred Taylor, says on his podcast, exposure leads to expansion. So as athletes learn more and as they have opportunities to engage in ways that they've never had before, I only see that as opening even more doors and more opportunities for athletes to leverage their platforms and utilize their voice. And, in the Olympic and Paralympic community, individual athletes such as Tori and her peers and all of the things that they are interested in, not only in the race and social justice space, but the things that they're passionate about as a whole. I'm excited to see where they take us because I would say that the areas are limitless, depending on what they're passionate about, and new technology comes on board every day that makes the world smaller and provides greater opportunities for all of us to be connected in ways that we never were before.
Absolutely. It's so true. the world has gotten so small and the access to the technology and the social media platforms and information, it's democratized the access to all this information. I'm thinking about the image I have in my mind of the podium at the 1968 Olympics, and two US American athletes with their fists in the air. But the third person on that podium was an Australian athlete who wore the patch to support the movement that our US athletes were championing. And I think of allyship and advocacy, like that we have these athletes speaking out. Let's if we focus on race for a moment, but we need allies and advocates. So I just wanted to close the remaining moments. If any of you have some ideas around how to bring even more people into the fold, the movement, who may not have the same lived experience, but know that if we address some of the biggest issues in society, it's going to help everybody, regardless of their background. Do any of you have any ideas around how athletes, I mean, I'm thinking of you, Madieu, in terms of it's a team sport, but people do have different backgrounds, and people were probably involved with your programs in Africa, even though they didn't necessarily grow up there. How do you get people involved in caring about issues that are different from their lived experience?
Part of it is just sharing your story and being very authentic about who you are, what's important to you. And when athletes in particular have the opportunity to go in the rooms, being able to just share their story. And it's very important for you to be able to have the allyship, because we all know a lot of things happen in life that is beyond your control. You need partners. And with us, we've been very intentional about seeking partners with, in particular, my alma mater, University of Maryland, great partner. But that opportunity would not have come about if I was not in front of them and being able to articulate what my vision is. So part of it also is being able to share your story, like I alluded to earlier, but also be willing to pivot, because whenever you have allyship or you have opportunities to partner with someone, they have some ideas that you may have too, and be very open-minded. And I think it doesn't mean that you lose the essence of who you are, but it just means you're a little bit more inclusive to be able to hear and share. And the last thing I will say is, even with allyship, I always share with some of our partners, empathy is a word that I always use. With everything that's going on with the social justice movement currently, there's partners that I may have who potentially are white, and they always ask me, how can I help? And one of the things I always say is, be empathetic. How does that look like? I think part of that is for you to understand the plight of what African Americans are going through in this country. And you may not necessarily have gone through it, but be willing to sit and listen. And if you have a strong relationship with someone who may not look like you, who's African American, be willing to ask them the tough questions and say, hey, I see what's happening. How can I be an ally? How can I help? What can I do? And part of it is just understanding what's currently going on and stepping outside of your own box, so to speak.
Really powerful. And it's a great lead into our final moments. We just have a couple minutes. You mentioned the word empathy, and I often like to go around the panel for one final sweep and just ask for a word that is either your North Star. I mean, the work you're all doing is so powerful, and it also requires a lot of energy. So getting empathy from others, I know, can keep you on track and feeling motivated. Madieu, what about you, Tori? Is there a word that comes to mind that just helps you stay on the path of this really important work?
Mm-hmm. I think my word is grace. I think sometimes it's easy to get just so wrapped up in your mind, whether you're not doing enough or not speaking up enough, or maybe you did do something and it didn't quite pan out the way you wanted, or you're just needing a break and feeling some type of way about needing some space and not saying anything about a particular moment or anything. And so I think giving myself grace in those moments is like, it's okay to take a step back. It's okay to take a breath.
Right.
And you know, to want to post about something positive or anything like that. So that helps.
I love that. Okay, I love it. We got a word. So we have just about a couple minutes left. So grace is really meaningful. I think everyone can use it. Blayre, what would you say if you could say a word and then a sentence or two to describe?
Yeah, so I would say joy. I think very much so the way Tori explained. There's so much going on, and I think the work that we do on a regular basis. I always say sometimes we're at work more than we are with our own families.
Yes.
And so it's important to remember the joyful moments in your work, right? And to see those joyful people, right? And they have to go hand in hand, right? The social justice work also has to go along with, making sure there's free mammographies for women who might have breast cancer, right? And so I think in this work, we have to remember that there is joy in it, that there will be joy, and to just focus on those joyful moments for the fight ahead.
Thank you. Oh, joy, so important. Bahati, what would you say? You give me a word in a sentence or two that.
Mine would be progress. And my philosophy is, and I was taught this as a child, leave the world a better place than you found it. And the only way I can do that is through continuing to work and advocate and push for progress in my own small part makes a difference in the world as a whole.
Sure does. Thank you. And last couple sentences, Sybil, Dr. Sybil, what would you say? Oh, you're on.
Sorry about that.
It's okay. You're on.
Acceptance is really important. Just accepting people where they are every day, every encounter. And then taking in all of what you all have said, grace, joy, progress, empathy, and using those words, those feelings to accept people where they are and to progress from there, to move forward.
This has been a true joy for me, just to bring this really interesting group of people who are purpose-driven, heart-centered, and really making a difference every single day. Thank you all for spending your afternoon with all of us, and wish you continued success, health, and happiness. Take care. Thank you.